Um, I've already introduced our filmmaker, and the best introduction, of course, is her film, so I will not say anything more about Hitomi Kamanaka. And seated next to her is Bob Rosner in the Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics and Physics at the University of Chicago. He's the William E. Rather Distinguished Service Professor in these departments and the college. And also, especially pertinent to our discussion today, he was the director of Argonne National Laboratory for 7 years. I'm very, very happy to have Bob, in his busy schedule, able to join us and share his knowledge and experiences. And next to Bob is Dave Kraft, the director of the Nuclear Energy Information Service. You can find a lot of very good, valuable literature on the table and on the left-hand side, looking from the stage there. A lot of information, particularly about Illinois, Indiana, our region, our locality. He co-founded the Nuclear Energy Information Service in 1981 with 7 other environmental activists. Like so many people involved in the program today, the pace of his life has changed almost unrecognizably since Fukushima happened. And finally, one of the co-organizers of the panel, Tomomi Yamaguchi, who's in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Bozeman, Montana State University in Bozeman. We have collaborated before in various kinds of social activism, teaching about social activism in Japan in our classes. And Tomomi has been doing field work with conservative pro-nuclear groups in this region, so she can tell us other aspects that were covered in this movie. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Hitomi, and she can perhaps update us on what has happened since.
Okay. So first of all, I say thank you to Noma and Tomomi and also Yukiko and for University of Chicago to have this kind of symposium and showing my new film. And I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much. And thank you. So Ashes to Honey. So the original title of Japanese is a bit different. So Japanese title is Mitsubachi no Haoto to Chikyū no Kaiten means that the sounds of honey bee and spinning the globe. But I put a different title, Ashes to Honey. Ashes means extreme ash that human being create is spent on nuclear fuel, radiation garbage. Then I really want to get rid of or minimize from the society. But I'm Japanese, so I'm trying to kind of change the energy from nuclear energy to natural energy by this film, showing this film to Japanese people to change their consciousness that Japanese people have been taught that you have to depend on nuclear power plant because you don't have such natural resources. That's why without a nuclear power plant, we cannot grow economy, and also you cannot live like American people. So, and this kind of propaganda is really, really strong, effective. And I think still after Fukushima, many Japanese average people are afraid to change the energy source from nuclear to natural energy. And so this film is the third film that I've been making 3 films. I call these 3 films Atom Trilogy. And I started from my experience in Iraq. I met Iraqi children who had leukemia and cancers because of use of depleted uranium missiles, weapons at the Gulf War. But at that time, it was 1998, I didn't understand why those children getting such diseases because 7 years ago, U.S. Army and Britain used this kind of munitions. And also, so children are living far away, 100 kilometers away. How come? Why they get diseases because of these weapons? And then I met this doctor, same doctor that performed in the previous film. Yeah, an emptied film, Dr. Hida. And he taught me how radiation affects on human body. And I never studied in my life. I grown up in Japan, where suppose that only one country experienced atomic bomb, but I never thought about atomic effects and also nuclear issue in my educational experience. And then I started understanding what's going on in Iraq. And then I found out this depleted uranium materials came from nuclear industries from Japan also. So it includes my garbage. So I was very angry why those children had to die. And it's not right. But then I wanted to change it. So I'm a filmmaker, so that's how I deliver information, which is different from mass media delivering. So then I can change some people's consciousness and also awareness. That's how I think we can shift the energy from nuclear to natural way. So that's what I'm trying, and I was thinking that I could have more time to change. So Japanese people get realized, and then by their own will, we can change the situation. But it was wrong. So Fukushima catastrophe happened, and then I really regret. So how I could think that I could have time, but it was wrong. But this happened, so now right after I was so depressing. But now I feel like still after this Fukushima catastrophe, something we can do positively. So that's how I'm thinking now. It's on the way. What is the best thing to do or a good thing to do? This is what now Japanese people are finding out right now. And after Fukushima catastrophe happened, governor of Yamaguchi Prefecture just announced a week ago they don't give permission to Chugoku Electric Company to fulfill that Tanobura Bay. So this is a small change, but a kind of progress and positive change, I think. So I don't talk so much because I'm really happy to sitting here with physicists. In Japan, I always propose some scientists who promote nuclear, but they never want to sit with me. So I think he's so great. So I really like to have a dialogue, so with a different kind of way of thinking people. So this creates something new, and I need to do it too. Thank you.
Okay, Bob the physicist.
Okay, so I have to confess that I feel a bit like the sacrificial lamb here.
Oh.
But maybe the way to start this is for me to tell you a little bit about myself and my attitude to the kinds of things that we heard here today. I saw of course, the movie this morning, which is enormously powerful, and so it is the case that I do support nuclear power, but, and there's a huge but from my perspective. So just to give you a feeling of what my involvement has been, yes, it is the case that I was the lab director of Argonne. Argonne is the place that essentially started the whole story. Most of the nuclear plant designs that exist in Western industrial countries came ultimately from designs that were made at Argonne National Lab. And in fact, even the very first of the submarine reactors that you heard about, the Nautilus reactor, was actually also designed at Argonne. So there's certainly legacy there and a responsibility to think about these things. And one thing to start off is I'm the guy. There's somebody protesting already. Okay, I didn't even say anything. I'm the lab director who caused a huge change at Argonne in terms of its nuclear legacy. Namely, I'm the fellow who closed down all of the hot cells at the lab. This is done, you can imagine, huge resistance both from the staff at the lab, who did not want to close down the hot cells. These are the places where you do large-scale nuclear experiments, but I did close them. And I got a letter, actually, from the chair of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, that accused me of threatening US national security because I closed them down. So it is to the credit of the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy it owns Argonne, the University of Chicago runs it, that they backed me up. They said my reasons for closing down were correct. My reasons had to do very much with the fact that, and here's the key, that nuclear energy in general, nuclear power, is associated with very large risks. There are risks. There's no doubt about them. And that means that when you deal with that, certainly either as a weapon that is within the context of the Defense Department, or in the commercial world, the Department of Energy, or the companies that deal with nuclear energy, there's a certain standard of behavior that's required that's not usually present in most industry. And let's just be blunt about that. The standards have to be higher because the risks are higher. And risk is always a product of probability of something happening times the consequences of something happening. And in the case of nuclear, the consequences can be devastating, even though the probability is small. In the end, that means that the risks are high. So the reason I closed the hot cells was simply because my evaluation was that, given the amount of money that we had from the federal government, that we actually couldn't operate them safely, and that was the end of the story. I wasn't willing to operate facilities like that 30 miles away from Chicago. It's just totally irresponsible. Now, having said that, you can then ask, well, okay, what about the kinds of questions that were raised, for example, this morning? Are there things, for example, that we shouldn't know about? Is it the case that we should know everything, or are there things that are best left unexamined? And my answer to that is, it's way too late. Way, way too late. The cat's out of the bag. The answer has been given over and over and over again, which is, if you don't do it, somebody else will do it. That's the kind of world we live in. And so my view of looking at this is that we have to look at something else. It's very much like what we deal with climate. Most of us, I'll bet it's just that everybody in this room does believe, I'm one of them, that climate change is driven anthropomorphically, that we're responsible for it. If you ask what we're doing about it, well, just look at what happened to Lieberman-Markey, that bill. It died, and it died because of inaction by Democrats. Okay? So where are we with that? Well, there are two ways of going about such things. One is you prevent something. That's one way of doing it, and we basically have failed that. The other way of dealing with it is now dealing with the consequences. And fundamentally, nuclear, that's really where we are. We're dealing with consequences of decisions that were made in the 1940s, 1950s, and that means that we have to have an additional level of seriousness about how we do things. Now, I want to turn a little bit over to the level at which we as humans understand, evaluate, respond to risk, the extent to which we are consistent about such things. And I want to address something that I think most of you are, in a sense, responsible for, just the way that the mother that we met this morning felt responsible for what she did. So I think most of you were probably alive when Iraq and Iran fought a war. And I think it's true that most of you are aware, maybe subliminally, that the United States at that time supported Iraq against Iran. We were sponsors of the war. Did you know that Iraq used chemical weapons of mass destruction against the Iranians? Do you remember any protests about that, large-scale protests about that here in the United States? I don't. So what does that make you feel? So my sense is that we are really bad at behaving well. That's my take. So let's take, for example, some of the things that we saw in the movie. The United States in the late 70s decided, this is the reign of Jimmy Carter, that the United States would stop reprocessing of nuclear fuel. And that was done for a number of reasons, one of them being, certainly Jimmy Carter felt this very strongly, still feels that today, that the United States should set an example that it was a mistake to reprocess fuel. It was an amazing, stunning fact of life that the very country that, that felt the effects of nuclear weapons made the decision to actually reprocess. You saw the plant, that's Hiroshima. It's on the Japanese Sea. It's on the western coast of Japan, facing China. Even more devastating is the process that's used by Hiroshima. You're talking about chemistry, and the chemistry is a process called Purex. Now, where does the word Purex come from? It comes from the fact that this is a process that was perfected in the late 1940s in the United States for reprocessing spent fuel from nuclear reactors to separate out the plutonium in order to make nuclear weapons. Purex is that process. So we have this conundrum that the very country that suffered by far the most the consequence of inventing nuclear weapons is in the business of building a nuclear plant that basically uses the same process that put together plutonium that fell on one of their cities. It's kind of stunning, isn't it? So what is going on here? Well, I think when we think about the way the world is going, one thing that has become abundantly clear, certainly to me, even on a personal level, is that the United States is not in a very good position to preach. It certainly is the case that from the point of view of social equity and justice, that the rest of the world has every desire and every right to reach for a standard of living that we have, for example, here in the United States, or in Western Europe, or in Japan, for that matter. So now what do you say when a place like Abu Dhabi, not known to be a center of high technology, goes out on the market and bids and entertains bids for nuclear plants? What do you say to a country like Vietnam that does the same? How would you feel if Nigeria did that? Now, as part of a program called the Global Nuclear Future that the American Academy of Arts and Sciences is running, we've had a chance to go to places like Abu Dhabi, to Singapore, to talk about these kinds of questions with folks that are involved in this. And one of the things that we heard loud and clear is the anger that people have abroad to American policy as regards nuclear. It's visceral. And why would that might be? Well, we were behind two treaties, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. We happen to be a signatory to the NPT. We are not a signatory to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. We're behaving as if we had signed it, but in fact, we didn't sign it. The Senate refused to confirm. Well, what about the NPT? The NPT was designed to basically guarantee access to the information to nuclear technology in return for country agreeing not to go the route of nuclear weapons. What did we do 3 years ago? We signed an agreement with India. India is not a signatory to the NPT, nor of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. They signed neither treaty. They're a nuclear weapon state. And we signed a treaty with them that gave them access to our nuclear technology. Do you think that we might have broken the treaty? Do you think you might be complicit in this? So my view is that we have a lot to think about how we operate in this country, how we entertain the politicians that we support, we vote for or not. I think it's a huge issue, and we're not the only ones who behave badly, that's for sure. We saw a lot of that in your movie. But I think it is very clear that there are some conundrums, and I want to end with this, that sometimes you have to be really careful what you wish for. So let me give you a concrete example. Some people would like us to basically get completely out of the nuclear business. Certainly the weapons, I think many here, I'm one of them, support the going to zero movement for the weapons, but what about nuclear energy? So let's suppose that we did go out of that business, that is from the civilian point of view. What would that mean? Well, the fact of the matter, what it would mean is that two things would happen. The first is that all knowledge, technical knowledge, in the nuclear realm would then devolve to be purely behind the fence. We're talking about the weapons program within DOE and DOD, as well as the nuclear navy. Those are the people that would have the knowledge. The rest of us would have nothing. Is that a smart thing to do? The second is, it turns out that the United States is supporting a program to take a high enrichment uranium, which is basically stuff that contains material that is fissile, that can be used for weapons, to basically decommission such plants. And there's an active program that the United States is supporting financially to basically take those plants, take out the HEU, the high enrichment uranium, and convert those plants to use low enrichment uranium. It's at the heart of making sure that folks that we wouldn't like to get a hold of fissile material don't get a hold of fissile material. Well, guess who trains those people? And guess what would happen if we didn't have those people? So I leave you with this thought. Sometimes the kinds of things that we really wish would happen have unintended consequences that are themselves not benign. And so this is an area where we have to think very, very carefully about how we go forward.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Dave Kraft, Director of Nuclear Energy Information Service based here in Chicago. And as you heard earlier, we do have materials at the back, so we welcome your stopping by and taking the materials. If there's an issue or a question we don't get to today, most of our stuff has our email address and our phone number, so feel free to contact us at a later date if you'd like to. I was not quite sure what I'd be saying today because I wanted it to be a response to the great film that we did see. Actually, both films were terrific, but specifically since I'm on this panel, to the film we just saw. And I need this every so often to see a film like this because we've been at this for 30 years. Our organization has not supported nuclear power, definitely is in favor of an energy future without it, and really believes that we can attain it. And I'll get into some of the details of why we believe that in a moment. But it's just nice to see that around the world there are other people who entertain the notion and then go out and do something about it. You know, they're actually getting it done. They are walking the walk, and that is perhaps one of the strongest messages I get from your film today, is that you have captured that in Japan as well as Sweden. And I want you all to know that it's happening elsewhere too. It's happening in many other countries, including the United States here. There's a terrific film called Kilowatt Hours, which is an odyssey of a married couple that travel the southeast part of the United States trying to figure out where their electrons come from. And boy, did they get a lesson. And when they came home, they did a lot of the things that you put in your movie. Now, I want to tell a couple of short stories, and it'll get to why our organization feels the way it does. About 2-3 weeks ago, we were called down to Springfield to testify before a joint House committee in the state legislature, which was dealing with the aftermath of Fukushima. And they wanted to know about the status of Illinois nuclear power. For those of you who may not know, we have more nuclear reactors here in Illinois than any other state. We have 14 here, 11 of which operate. We also have the nation's only de facto high-level radioactive waste facility, I guess you would call it, which is the General Electric Morris operation. And we generate more radioactive waste of the high-level sorts every year than any other state. We're also a pretty hefty contributor to low-level radioactive waste. So I guess in terms of nuclear power, we're number one. If we were a nation, we'd be the 12th largest nuclear power in the world, tied with China, which may be changing in the next year or so. But it gives you an idea of how reliant and over time Illinois has become on nuclear power. So for me to get up here and tell you we can end that is pretty much of a stretch for a lot of people, but I really do believe it, and here's why. First, I want to start out by what I said to the Joint Committee that I testified before the other day. They were concerned about remarks that we were putting before them, that some of our reactors that were similar in design to the Fukushima reactors that exploded, melted down, caught fire. We have 4 of them here in Illinois, and we were recommending that, at least for the time being, these reactors may be subject to being taken offline until further analysis could show that their design issues were not going to be resulting in the same thing we saw in Japan. And actually, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission may be forced to rule on this because a petition has been filed in Washington for this very idea. Well, the legislators were concerned about, well, where would we get the power? Where would we get the power if these reactors were taken offline? And the great irony was that on the very same day, in the New York Times, the IPCC, the Commission dealing with global warming, pointed out that right now, today, using the technology available to us, we have the capability of a renewable energy future. Not just future, but present. If we build and use what we do have. And that's the key. I've never seen a power plant give a benefit to society if it isn't built. And if you don't build wind farms and put up solar panels and geothermal, it's not going to be able to compete. It's not going to be able to do anything. And that's largely what we've ended up with here in this country. You can't say you need nuclear power or any other energy resource if you don't have an energy policy. Because really what you're doing is spinning the wheel and throwing the darts. And I think your example of Congress is the perfect example of the nature of our energy policy. It is non-existent. The second facet of a policy is you gotta plan it. Plan it. If you don't plan now for the future, of course you're not going to end up doing anything. Now, those are the 2 big pieces that have been missing in terms of advancing renewables to the point where the IPCC says we can get to today. We haven't had a plan. We haven't been building. It's been a self-fulfilling prophecy dominated by the fossil fuel industry and the nuclear fuel industry, which reaches the self-proclaimed conclusion that we need nuclear power. Well, again, if you don't build stuff, it isn't going to benefit you. Some people say renewables are marginal. They can't produce enough power for baseload. How many of you know that in the state of Illinois, the total wind capacity that's online today exceeds the power output of the 2 Dresden nuclear power plants that are operating. It doesn't sound very marginal to me. It's over 2,000 megawatts of wind power, just wind power in Illinois alone. So from those standpoints, you know, from a policy standpoint, from what's practicable, what experts are telling us today, if you've read Scientific American for the last 5 years, we have the technical know-how. But I don't even think we should start building until we do something else first, and that's be energy efficient. We still waste a lot of energy, and Japan itself has acknowledged that for the last 10 years they slacked off on energy efficiency, and now they're paying the price. Now they're going to have to be energy efficient because they have no choice. We can plan our energy efficiency, so we have more flexibility. But here was the real kicker. In a previous life, I worked at a community mental health center. I was in clinical mental health for 12 years in uptown Chicago. And one lunch hour, I was leafing through our diagnostic statistical manual and just looking up the diagnoses we use and how we reach those conclusions about people. Flipped open to the page on alcohol and substance abuse and read the definition, the clinical definition of what is an alcoholic, what is a drug abuser, what are the signs, what are the symptoms. And just on a lark, wherever the word alcohol appeared, I crossed it out and put in electricity. And much to my horror, the clinical definition still worked, which says to me that, at least in a very metaphorical sense, we are energy addicts. So when you have a leaky bucket, the solution is not to build bigger pumps. When you're an addict, the solution, 5 minutes, anyone? The solution is not to go on methadone. You know, there are other approaches that you can do. So from that standpoint alone, I got the Great Awakening. And then I went back to the literature. In 1989, 1990, the Electric Power Research Institute, not exactly the bastion of no-nuke-cookdom in the world, came out with a report saying that using the best available energy efficiency technology of 1989 and 1990 that you could get at Lowe's, Home Depot, whatever the stores were back then, I don't know, some of them are gone. If we were to do that as a nation and use the very best, we could conserve and get rid of between 24 and 44% of all the electricity we're generating. How much electricity do all 104 nuclear power plants give us each year in a percentage? 18 to 20. So by being energy pigs, while I agree the world has a right to want to be American, I don't recommend it, at least not in the energy sector. So these things all come together as a gestalt for us that, look, we're doing it wrong to begin with. I mean, the laws of thermodynamics tell us that. Any of you go to Las Vegas? Anybody? Oh, come on. Of course. We all know the games are rigged there. Well, the biggest rigged game is the universe. The laws of thermodynamics tell you, you will always be a loser, guy. So the best you can do is lose slowly. And that's where energy efficiency comes in and conservation. We get smarter with energy. We use it wiser. I mean, none of you really wants nuclear power or coal power. You couldn't tell the difference in your light bulb. In fact, you might not even want light bulbs. What you really want is light or heat or comfort. And you can get those a lot of other ways than building $8 billion tea kettles that render large portions of your real estate uninhabitable for the time being. It turned an $8 billion asset into a $25 billion liability in 2 days at Fukushima. We don't have to go down that road anymore. If we were sitting here 160 years ago, the great debate would have been, can this country, can its economy survive without slavery? 100 years ago, it might have been something like the blacksmiths union and the buggy whip manufacturers really going after Congress, you know, about the need for more horse subsidies and you know, stuff for their products. You know, we used to ship things to California using Conestoga wagons. We don't do any of that anymore. We found a better way. And that's what planning is all about. You decide the future you want, and then you go after it. And we think we have the intelligence and the technology today to create the kind of future where there are no more Chernobyls, there are no more Fukushimas, where it's very clear that if you have a nuclear infrastructure, it's for one purpose only. And then the world can do something about that. So this is the future we want, and we'll get into more detail on this probably in the question and answer session later at the roundtable, correct?
Yeah.
Good. So I think I need to stop there.
Good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. So I'll go last. As you just saw in Ashes to Honey, there's almost a 30-year history of intense conflict between supporters and opponents of the Kaminoseki nuclear power plants, and which begins in 1983. And while 90% of 500 Iwaishima residents opposed the plant, the majority of the 33,000 residents of the town of Kaminoseki support the construction. The fact that those in favor of Kaminoseki plant are not featured in Ashes to Honey demonstrates how extremely complicated this issue and resulting interpersonal relations have been in the community, and how difficult it is for someone with an oppositional stance to even approach the supporters to hear their side of the story. I will try to speak a little bit about the other side of the Ashes to Honey debate. That is, about the supporters of the construction. Last June, I visited Iwaishima Island with Yuki Miyamoto. We wanted to see for ourselves the actual site of construction, and as well as the protest movement against the Kaminoseki plant. Our visit was only for a few hours, yet we saw numerous indicators throughout the island of the protests in the form of signs, posters, and flyers. We briefly saw Takashi-kun, who was featured in the film, riding his motorcycle, which was a nice moment. Okay, this is Takashi-kun. And wandering around the tiny island, Yuki and I went into the small building of Iwaishima branch of Kaminoseki Town Hall. The smiling person at the reception gave us a map of the island and kindly started to explain sightseeing spots. I then noticed a flyer at the reception window that read, "Study tour to visit Genkai nuclear power plant in Saga." The flyer said the tour for 30 residents had been organized by the Kaminoseki Town Hall, with the town paying transportation and lodging costs for tour participants. I asked the man at the reception about it, and there was an awkward moment of silence and tension. It was obvious from his discomfort that he tries to avoid such conversation with outsiders. As a municipal employee of the town of Kaminoseki, he has to promote the plant's construction, even while working in Iwaishima. This one short yet memorable moment encapsulated for Yuki and me the level of divisiveness on this issue on this small island and in the town of Kaminoseki. I became interested in the Kaminoseki issue during 5 years of research on conservative movements in Japan. This included interviewing workers at the small local biweekly paper based in Yamaguchi City. When I started my interviews with its editor-in-chief, I was quickly diverted from the issue I had assumed were primary to them, as I came to realize that they consider the construction of the Kaminoseki plant to be the most important issue for them. The editor-in-chief said it's his life work, and that he has a firm belief that the plant will benefit the local community and the prefecture where he grew up, lives, and loves so much. He has been covering this issue for the past 25 years, since he began his career as a journalist, and also has been an activist on this issue. I made repeated visits to Yamaguchi, trying to hear their stories as much as possible. This small newspaper, typically 8 pages, is filled with an amazing number of stories, articles in support of nuclear energy and the construction of the plant. This support has continued in the wake of Fukushima. As with other supporters of nuclear power, the paper points out its advantages in an era of global warming, along with its economic benefits for the local. An argument that particularly stands out for me is the claim that the plant is the means to finally start building a real community for Kaminosaki residents. The town's population is rapidly decreasing, and the average age of residents is about 75, as Kamanaka-san's film mentioned. This demographic shift to the cities and abandonment of impoverished rural areas is a serious issue throughout Japan. An interview with Kaminoseki's mayor, Kashiwabara Shigemi, from the January 2009 issue of the paper highlights the controversy. He argues that how divided the town has been due to the nuclear power plant issue. Yet, he is also deeply appreciative of having the grant in aid worth 2.5 billion yen, which is like $30 million, from the national government, as well as the money from the Chugoku Electric Corporation, because his town has a serious fiscal crisis. To build a flowery ocean town is his goal, with cable TVs in all houses, buses for the elderly and disabled, new municipal buildings, and so on. He'd like to have more tourists and to buy many empty houses in the town and replace them with public housing. He wants to bring back liveliness, promote local food, and empower the local economy using the power plant. The power plant has been the major issue in the town's mayoral and city assembly elections, and supporters of the plant have always won them. The proponents thus argue that it is democratic will of the people to build the plant. In addition, the paper argues that it is a national policy issue for the interest of Japan as a nation to remain competitive against other world power in terms of the ability to sell nuclear technology to developing nations. Using this same line of argument, they characterize the opposition as consisting of selfish people who are not thinking of the interests of their own community and Japan as a nation. This reasoning has led to further characterization of the opposition as outsiders committing illegal acts, equating them to gangs and terrorists. The paper argues that the residents of Iwaishima, along with self-proclaimed environmentalists, are blocking the construction of the plant illegally and creating a nuisance with their presence. On the other hand, the editor-in-chief had also been rejected by Iwaishima residents. He blames the opponents for creating extreme divisions between the two factions and claims that information is extremely controlled in Iwaishima, and for him to even visit the island requires courage, because the opposition controls the ferry to and from the island, they could trap him on the island. Furthermore, the newspaper has been extremely critical of reports on the controversy from the mass media. To him, the media leans too much toward the opposition side and frequently delivers stories sympathetic to the opposition, unlike probably many of us would think. For him, the newly released films on Iwaishima, including Ashes to Honey, are propaganda and presents outsiders' opinions. He found the beautiful images of nature in those films to be manipulative, powerful tools of the opposition. Now, in the post-Fukushima world, many of the arguments given in support of the plant on the prosperity of communities with a power plant, on the safety of the advanced nuclear technology that Japan has, and so forth, seem to have lost credibility for many. The construction of Kaminoseki stopped temporarily again on March 15th due to an inquiry by Yamaguchi Prefecture. And then, as Kamanaka-san just mentioned, Yamaguchi Prefecture itself may change its direction, actually, to oppose the construction of the plant. Likewise, the mayor of Kaminoseki said to the assembly that he may now have to reconsider the plan. It is also obvious from its coverage of the paper, the conservative paper, that the paper has the paper and the editors have been experienced doubt and criticism from its readers due to its commitment to continue promoting the construction of the plant. Actually, the editor names it as backlash currently against the supporters of the plant. I could see from his writings that he's deeply frustrated, characterizing the ongoing situation as an overly emotional reaction by the Japanese public and the media. The paper explains that the basic methods of control nuclear hazards are staying the same, and no serious immediate harm for human health has been reported so far. Should we give up on the future dream technology? The paper asks. Also, paper asks, should we just ignore the existence of impoverished people who may be committing suicides because of the poverty? And what should we do with those people? The irony is that the task that the paper has tried to do for such a long time, to make the urban majority of Japan, who are located far away from the nuclear power plants, but who use nuclear power in great amounts, aware of the nuclear power plant issue, has been achieved, but not in support of their cause. The power plant, as well as the very socio-economic structure of having struggling rural communities take upon themselves the risks and pay the price of affluent urban life, has caused long-lasting serious conflicts. While we could criticize the local paper's arguments, I do not feel I can do it easily from my position as an urbanite who has spent a lifetime using the energy produced in those areas, while being ignorant of those issues and not being personally affected by those issues. I'd like to end by posing a question. What kind of a changed society are we going to envision? And most especially, what are we willing to do for such a society? Thank you.
I wonder if other panelists want to respond to that question that Tomomi left us with, or any aspects of her talk. Yeah, okay, you and then Bob.
Okay, so we talk about the nuclear issue, but the nuclear issue is not just purely technical issue. I think it's kind of human matter, and people at Kaminoseki, I think Tomomi said that the majority of town support building this nuclear power plant, not because they understand the techniques and the risk of nuclear power plants, because just government gives money and also electric company brings economies. But you know, already we have 40 years history of nuclear power plants in Japan, and the Fukushima prefecture and the town where really Fukushima nuclear power plant is sited, called Futaba town, and even just before catastrophe happened, they almost bankrupted. And because at the beginning they could get money, but later on they cannot get so much, and they built so many buildings, and then you need to have running cost. And even mayor of the town, so local government couldn't pay the salary to a mayor, so almost the town was bankrupted. And also other town where nuclear power plant located, and one closest to Hiroshima, called Ikata town. And this Ikata town became most decreased the population among Ehime prefecture, and also less young people living in this town. And then the town becoming more and more less energetic. So this kind of sample, mass media never talks about and never write about, and then always talks about if you support Japanese economic growth, you have to accept, because it's must, kind of necessity, kind of image always created by mass media and talked about it. And then I think we have to divide the issue about the nuclear issue between human matters and economies and also technical matter. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I want to go back to an issue that I raised during my presentation, which has to do with the competence of the people that are actually managing the companies. And it speaks to the heart of what we just heard, actually. And maybe at this point, we're not going to be polite anymore, okay? So I'm not going to be polite.
Not be.
I'm not going to be polite. So you can ask yourself, to what extent a company like TEPCO, which is the company that ran the plants at Fukushima, Daiichi, to what extent it was the kind of corporation that you would entrust to run a nuclear power plant. And I'll tell you what my feeling is. I happen to know some of the folks there, including in the Japanese Atomic Energy Agency, and I would say that I wouldn't trust them. Now, why is that? Some of it has to do with what is frankly imbued in Japanese culture. And that has to do with the respect for authority, the respect for elders, the respect for position. And if you've been reading the New York Times recently, it's finally leaking out that there was a huge conflict between the site operators, that's the folks that were at the site, the engineers that ran the plants, and the folks back in Tokyo that were in charge of the company. The folks at the site wanted to do very early venting of the pressure vessel, and the folks back in Tokyo said no. And if you dig back why that was, the folks in Tokyo were interested and worried about and concerned about public image, namely release of gas that potentially contained radioactive materials. The folks on site were worried about the explosions. So this is the issue that TEPCO has, which is to what extent does authority properly get deployed if people from the bottom tell you that there's a difficulty, that it's coming down, that the folks at the top respond properly. And I would argue that it doesn't work that way, and it's broken. So.
Yeah, but you know, so you just said that it is Japanese culture. I agree. And you know, so in Japan, you can't against to upper stage of people, and you cannot say no. So I think Japanese people should be more impolite.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah. Right, that's my point.
So what you most respect is important in Japan. So in this case about the Fukushima catastrophe, I think so. I've been meeting those people in Tokyo, TEPCO, and also inspectors of nuclear techniques.
Yes.
And they are really bad about communication. You saw in my film that the bureaucrats talks about not really listening to people and not responding people. And this kind of attitude they kept for a long time, and they cannot change it so immediately. Even this kind of big disaster happened. They're really, really shocked also about how they didn't change. And also, average Japanese people also are shocked how they didn't change, even still.
Right.
Now also.
Right.
Dave?
Well, lest the audience leaves thinking that this is a uniquely Japanese problem,
Isn't it?
I just wanted to point out that for 30 years I've heard stories from whistleblowers. Some I are better able than others to validate, but one in particular that comes to mind was that of a now deceased former Exelon employee who won awards and accolades in his particular profession all over the place. He was in demand for conferences, to conduct workshops, to do trainings, crackerjack at what he did. And when he stepped on the toes of Exelon in management on a quality assurance issue, because certain performance bonuses were attached at the higher up level of the company, this guy eventually got first laterally arabesqued and then forced out of the company. He was eventually fired. So another example that many of us, and perhaps you've seen the stories in the New York Times again in the last few weeks, is the cozy, far beyond cozy relationship between the upper echelons of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission here and management positions of the nuclear utilities. One most notable was a commissioner named Merriweather, who, before he left his position as a nuclear regulatory commissioner, allegedly contacted a CEO from a nuclear utility here in Illinois, which will go unnamed, and was fishing for jobs. And no sooner did he leave the Nuclear Regulatory Commission after ruling on something where there was an apparent conflict of interest, where he was hired by the Shaw Group, which is the French company Arriva's American component, to do nuclear stuff. So just want you to know, it seems to be a universal deficit that absolute power corrupts absolutely. So.
But the matter is what should we do from now? So even Japan, we got this kind of catastrophe. Even in Tokyo, where I'm living, getting so much contamination, and also such a wide. Concretely?
Like how has your everyday life changed since Fukushima as someone living in Tokyo?
Seems, I think majority of people in Tokyo, they don't use mask, but I use mask. And I think minority, maybe 10%, maybe less than 10% of people, population in Tokyo wearing mask. And also, they are not informed how much polluted the air and soil and water and foods. This is really problem. And Japanese government stopped announcing that, for example, this cabbage or this spinach or vegetables, how much pollution contains, for example, iodine 131 or cesium 137, and it's hidden. And you can't have choice for your children, also to yourself. Also, they change the average of acceptance of radioactive contamination among foods. Before it was 370 becquerel per kilogram because government decided when Chernobyl happened, but now it became high up to 2,000. And then I went to Germany last month, and then they say their average, their limitation is 8 for adult and 4 for children. How huge contamination we have to accept in Japan. And the information is not clear and not open and not available. This is really problem for us. And I do mask, and then when you came back to home, and then you take it off, then you count it by Geiger counter. It really gets high ratio. It accumulates the particles, the small particles of radiation still, because this catastrophe is ongoing and no way to stop it. So TEPCO and Japanese government, they don't have idea to stop it. No techniques. And then we are stuck. And we are just watching that 4 reactors emitting radioactive pollution to air and to the sea. It's really miserable.
I don't know if this is a question we can pursue further here, but in this panel, I think there's several important strands that came up which seem incommensurable. Like I think that Bob Rosner's cautions about what it means for all of nuclear technology knowledge to be possessed by the military it is alarming. and what it means for the United States to get out of this business, and what it means of what it abandons to experts here and elsewhere. I think that's very sobering. But how do we bring that kind of consideration into conversation with what you just heard Hitomi say about how life has been changed really forever for our generation and for younger people? How do you calculate the cost? We keep saying nuclear energy is cheap, but how do you convert into cost the cleavages in the community brought about just by the desire to site a reactor, the kinds of thing that Tomomi has made even more dramatic for us? Not to mention the kinds of, we talked this morning about how the culture of secrecy then invades individual families and individual psyches as well. So that's going on in a lot of places in Japan now. Mother-in-law against daughter-in-law. Which one is needs to leave? Which one is unwilling to leave? Siblings, spouses, the kind of ultimate anxiety about what the rest of your life is going to look like. So as Bob said, when a catastrophe happens, it is pervasive. And how do we talk about that? Listening to Tomomi and Hitomi, I felt that these two groups actually had so much in common. That is to say, how do we have a flourishing human community here? And the great division was the nuclear reactor, and I kind of thought, well, can't they both go on a field trip to Sweden and do something? But why is it that these positions come to seem absolutely intractable, along with the technical kinds of demands? So, Bob.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you came back to Sweden. I'm not going to be an apologist for Exxon, for sure. Okay. But I'm not as much of a pessimist as you might think. I think one answer to your question definitely has to do with the nature of the social contract that exists in a country and the nature to which the governed and the governors are willing to engage in an open discussion. I think in the United States that it's still a work in progress. Sweden is a particularly interesting example because the movie didn't actually tell the end of the story about Sweden. There's a very important point there. It is the case that Sweden did decide to close the nuclear chapter some years ago. Basically, the decision that was made was that they would run their nuclear reactors. They have 10 reactors operating currently until the end of their service life, and then they would close them. But about 2 years ago, in February 2009, that decision was rescinded. They decided not to do that. And in fact, they decided to go back to building new reactors. And in fact, between February of 2009 and now, there was an open process by which they solicited bids from local communities for a repository, permanent repository. And just within the last few months, a decision was made, a site selection was made, and they're going to have a deep borehole where their nuclear waste will go. Now, the key element, I think, in this is the huge difference in the way that the politics played out, the openness of the process, the kinds of discussions that we saw, that we just heard about, simply did not exist. You saw Swedes in this movie. And I think on both sides of the pro and anti, the Swedes just behave differently. They're open about it. They're willing to have discussions. They're willing to sit in the same room. And they don't do what often we also do in the United States. I'll give you a country example. There is a presidential commission, a blue ribbon panel, that was commissioned by this administration to look at nuclear waste. This is following the decision to close Yucca Mountain completely. And that commission is about to come out with its findings. I believe the preliminary report is due in June, right? Now July.
End of July.
Right, okay. Now here's the key point. To what extent do you think that process has been open? You know the answer, right? The discussions are closed. You can't go in. I have heard only through rumors what is going on. My view is it's another recipe for having the kind of problem that we've had all along, which is you're going to get huge amount of divisiveness and the response to the report. People will simply feel that they haven't been listened to on either side. And my view is that that's not the way to move forward. Now, I'm not a sociologist. I'm not a politician. I don't know anything about political science. I have no clue how you would change how we go about doing these sort of things. But the Swedes are teaching us something here, which is there is a way of going about it. By the way, the Canadians have done something within the last 5 years that's very similar. Very open process to deal with their nuclear waste. And we here in the United States have not quite gotten there yet. And the Japanese, I think, I'm sorry to say, you're even worse. So
Right.
there we are.
Yeah, but I have I like to add some information. So, I talked with the head of Ministry of Energy in Sweden, Thomas. And he said that, okay, we allow electric company to rebuild nuclear power plant, but within 10 reactors, never increase. And also, electric company has full responsibility to compensate whole budget that if something happened.
Yes.
But in Japan, now TEPCO trying to escape the responsibility to compensate everything.
Right.
But in Sweden, you have to compensate everything. So infinitively. So this is a condition, and also government never helps this electric company. So, and I asked to Thomas that so even under this condition, they like to build. He said it's impossible.
So
Yeah. Also in United States, you have Price-Anderson law.
Right.
Yeah, it's much higher risk for electric company to get accident.
So, maybe just an explanation. So in the United States, in return for the federal government providing the capping insurance for nuclear accidents, that is, all of us, will bear the cost if something happens. Okay. The other side of the coin was that the operating companies had to subject themselves to a regulatory process, which is basically the NRC. That was the deal that was made. And I quite agree with you that, and many people have argued that the Price-Anderson bill, which basically took away the ultimate risk of failing, that is, of basically going bankrupt, that in fact has been a factor in American companies not being as careful about things as they should be. I agree with that.
After this kind of catastrophe happened, so now I feel like compensation means nothing. It's priceless. The air polluted, you can't compensate it.
Okay, Dave?
There were some numbers you used in your movie which show the absurdity of even trying to figure this out. I don't know what it means to excavate 15 inches of topsoil from everywhere within so many miles of a certain place. First of all, doing it is a problem. Secondly, where do you take it to? Somebody else's backyard. And what happens to it there? Does it get incinerated? Does it get left out in the rain and it washes into the water supply? Yeah, who knows? The whole point is it ripples out into something bigger and bigger. The cans get kicked further down the road, farther away from the responsible parties. So, yes, the complexity grows as this goes on. We saw this at Chernobyl. And now you begin getting into even areas of rational and irrational in terms of the justification for not wanting to buy, let's say, produce from Japan or rice or fish. But even just the fear of it is what triggered India from cutting you off even before the numbers were in. So, who wants to keep playing on that game field? I think, time to say game over and get to something else, because we can't even imagine the amounts of ripples of this whole enterprise when you factor in all of these things. And then there's the issue of time. As you use the word in perpetuity, infinity. So.
Yeah.
Maybe one other little corrective. You're quite right that in Sweden they're unlikely to build nuclear plants. But one of the reasons for that is that they have a partner who's next door. That's Finland. And guess what Finland is doing? Finland is currently building 2 nuclear plants, and their aim is very simple. They're under construction, yes. Arriva is building them, and their business plan is actually to sell to Sweden. So I'm just telling you, it's a more complicated story. And by the way, then the Finns have discussed with the Swedes that the Swedes will actually provide the repository. The repository of which I spoke is likely to be a component in the Finnish plan to deal with their spent fuel. One thing that's important to understand about Sweden is that where they actually get their power from. Okay, some numbers will make you sit back and think. First of all, most of their power comes from hydro. Their policy all along has been hydro dominates, and it's of the order of 50%. 45% comes from the nuclear plants. In other words, the stuff that you saw is 5%. So when we talk about replacing wholesale energy supply, it's a very difficult conversation. One of the key elements to keep in mind about energy is that it is enormously capital intensive. It is extremely expensive to change wholesale the way that we produce electricity, the way we distribute it. And it's one of the reasons that, in fact, I totally agree with what Dave just said before in his talk, which is if you don't plan in the energy sector, you will truly, truly never change, because the time scale to do really anything is measured in decades, not years. So not planning is absolutely assurance that you won't have change.
But I'd like to say something about Sweden and Finland, and this one of new under construction nuclear power plants. They have huge problem that because Areva, the French company, is building it, and then just only 1/3 built, and then they spent it all budget, and no bank wants to lend money. And then I think European media talks about it, nuclear financial meltdown or something like that. Yeah, so they cannot build it because it's too expensive. And also, I think Swedish government try to be sustainable in terms of electricity and also in terms of transportation. So that's why they want to reduce consumption of energy, both sides, and try to be self-sufficient as much as they can. I think this kind of vision or trial is valuable.
I think Dave will make a final point here, and then maybe we'll take one question from the audience, and it seems like we're already starting the roundtable, but with only half our membership. Right. So Dave will say something, and then we'll take one question from the audience, and then we'll take a brief break and move into the roundtable.
It's a final word on the issue of the planning and anticipating, because now we have 2 world-class examples of what happens when you decide to rely on nuclear, and rather than plan an alternative that you can phase in under your own control and gradually and methodically, you're forced to suddenly deal with its absence through crisis. We saw that happen in the Chernobyl situation, and now we're seeing it again at Fukushima, where whether the Japanese wanted to be energy efficient or not is irrelevant now, because now they have to be. Now what that's going to do to their economy, that remains to be seen. So the point on planning, and I think we're getting a panel that's finally in agreement on something, is, it's the kind of thing where you figure out where you want to get to and ways to get to it, and you methodically implement it in, rather than deal with the absence of something in a crisis, as we've seen. It's a lot easier to do it the first way.
Yep.
Let's take one question from an audience member.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Linda Lewison, and I am an energy policy consultant and a member of NEIS. Nuclear Energy Information Service is the watchdog organization for Illinois. We're Nuke Central here for the past 30 years. So in response to your question, what can we do, each of us, which is the question, and we now know more than most people just being here today. I think that working through this organization and to bring together this artistic endeavor, these movies, And what can we do is where I'm at. I'm a practical person. What can we do on Monday? And so I am, along with other people and organizations, working on bringing your movies to college campuses and to be shown wherever we can in Illinois and around the country. And I think especially the second movie, Hitomi, Rakasha Rhapsody, which really anticipated Fukushima by years, is so important to be shown and isn't being shown. So when I ask myself, what can we do? If any of you are part of organizations or know of organizations that can help show these movies on campuses around the state, in theaters, that I think brings together and then engenders programs like this around the movies, but engenders what the point is of art, telling our story and trying to share the knowledge and then help people see things a different way. So if any of you know, would like to talk to me afterwards about how to make that happen and show these movies around other places, I think that is something very specific that we can do right now.
And in Japan, I'm showing this film, 3 films. It's organized by grassroots people, and they never participated in any activities. And they're young people, and they have a small gathering of screening in their own communities, and 700 places, and it's spreading over, and they started networking, and it's really, I call it exercise of democracy.
Thank you. Well, that's what we can do here.
I think that's a good place to end this session. Thank you, each of you, for your thoughtful contributions.